So tonight I'm going to show you how to make this little hand towel that goes over your cooker handle or over a drawer handle, and it's just made out of a kitchen towel, a hand towel that's cut in half with some fabric on the top. Now the lovely thing I like about this is because you're cutting the hand towel in half, you can make two, so you've got one on the handle and one in the wash. So I really love these. So I'm going to make another one of these tonight. I'm going to make it in this lovely teal with this spotted fabric that I've got. So I've got some cut-offs from this from making my daughter a circle skirt. So I'm just going to use some of the cut-offs to make the tops for these towels. So we'll get started and I'll show you how I make them. Right, to start with, I'm going to get my fabrics. I've got this lovely spotty fabric, and I've got 4 layers here because I'm going to be making 2 towels out of them. So I've just got them nice and pressed so that there's no horrible creases in it. And these are just cut-offs from a circle skirt that I made my daughter. So never throw anything out. So I'm just going to lay my template that I've shown you in a previous video how to make onto it, and I'm just going to pin that on. And then I'm just going to cut this out. Got to cut along the bottom. And that's your template cut out. So those are just my scrap pieces of. So you just take your template off. And you don't need that anymore. So now all you've got to do with these is get the ironing board out, and you just want to turn these over. I like to turn mine over about 1/2 inch. So, and then press them. So I'll just get the ironing and the ironing board, which I've already got here ready. I've got my little tabletop one. I think I'm going to have to invest in one of those wool ones that I keep seeing all over the place. They look quite nifty. So I'm just going to take 2 at a time. And I'm going to line them up nicely. And then I'm just going to fold the top one over first, just about 1/2 inch. Now you could measure this if you wanted to. If you've got a seam measure, you could measure it, but I've always just eyeballed them. It's nicely lined up there, and then I just turn it over, make sure it's still lined up, and then fold the other one over to match it. And then I'm just going to pin these together roughly. You can either pin them or you can use your little clips if you've got those little wonder clips, I think they're called. So that's those 2 done. So I'm just going to get rid of the ironing board. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my towel in. I'm going to make sure it's folded in half correctly. I've already cut the label off. There was a little label on. And now I advise, if you're going to be giving these as a gift or selling them, that you make sure that you get a really good quality towel. You don't want to be giving somebody a cheap nasty towel as a gift. So I folded that in half so that it's nice and even. I've levelled it all out so it's nice and half. And then I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and I'm just going to cut along this fold. Right, now you don't have to, but I like to seal this edge a bit because as you can see it's going to fray. It's got little bits coming off. Now you don't need to because it's going to be encased in your bit that you've just cut out, your template for the top. But if I'm giving these as gifts or I'm selling them, I want to be 100% sure they're not going to fray and there's not going to be any little bits. So I've got an overlocker, so I'm going to overlock mine. Now, a lot of sewing machines nowadays do have an overlock stitch on it. So if you look in your manual, it will tell you what your overlock stitch is. If you don't have an overlock stitch on your sewing machine or you don't have an overlocker, you could just zigzag along there if you wanted to. But you don't have to do anything with that end if you really don't want to. But I just like to make sure it's nice and sealed. I've got an overlocker, so I'm going to use it. So I'll get the overlocker out and I'll bring you back to show you how that works. Right, so this is my overlocker. I've got it set up with white thread because I don't have any green thread. You know, these are quite expensive, these big spools. So I've basically just got the basic colours that I use a lot of. So I've got white, black and red. And I suppose as time goes on I will buy more. So I'm just going to switch it on. And what the overlocker does is it trims off the edges. It's got like a little blade here. As you feed it through, it trims off the edges and it seals them. So you know, like when you buy something from the shop and it's got that nice professional sealed end, this is what the overlocker does. So I'm just going to put these through really quickly. It's quite noisy, so I apologise. It's just trimming off the raw edge and just sealing it so that it's not going to fray. And I'm just going to chain stitch these because that's, you know, one thing that you can do on an overlocker. And this is the only thing an overlocker does. It's you know, unless you're going to be using it a lot, it's not worth the investment really. But I use it a lot to do seams and things. I'm going to be making a dressing gown in a few weeks, and I'll show you that I will probably make the majority of the dressing gown on this overlocker. So that's that. So, and as you can see, it makes rather a nasty dusty mess as it's trimming it all off and sealing the edge. But as you can see now, the edge is nicely sealed, so that's not going to fray and no little bits are coming off it anymore like it was before. So, right, so I'll put the overlocker away and I'll get the sewing machine out and I'll show you what the next stage is going to be. Right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and I'm going to sew sort of about 1/4 of an inch from the edge all the way around, leaving the bottom bit open, the bit that we've ironed. I'm going to fold it back across to sew it, but I'm not going to sew along that line. I'm going to leave that bit open and just sew around the rest. So I'm just going to line it up on my machine. I'm going to adjust my needle. I'm just going to back stitch a little bit at the beginning. Oh, turn the speed down. There we go. And off we go. A little bit too slow for me. And you just want to slow down as you go around the corners. Just going to open those ends up again that I've ironed over. Just go to the end and I'm just going to back stitch a little bit. That's it. And then I'm just going to cut my ends off. You can see I've sewn all the way around the edge, but I've left this bottom is still open. Okay, I'm just going to do that with the other one and I'll show you what I do next. Right, so now you've sewn all the way around the edge, you need to thin off around the curves, otherwise it's going to be quite bulky when you turn it. You can either take a pair of scissors and just snip in quite close to the stitching, Or what I like to do is I like to take a pair of these shearing scissors. They're just like a zigzag pair of scissors, and I like to just trim all the way around the edge and take the bulk off all the way around. It just means that it's going to turn a lot nicer. So I just trim all the way around the edge. Be careful not to go over your stitching. You just want to trim nice and close. And then when you've done that, you just want to turn it the right way round. So I usually just go into the top. I don't find you need any special tool with this. Your fingers will be fine. You just run along the stitch line and push it all out. My finger along the inside, and then just give them a bit of a wiggle from the outside. And then I'm just going to get the ironing board out, and I'm just going to give that a little press so that it stays in place. I'm just going to make sure the bits that we've ironed, folded over and ironed previously, I'm just going to make sure they're tucked in and they're still on their little line. I'm just going to tuck them back in so that that's all nice and neat and tucked away. And then that's that bit done. I've already done the other one, so the two are ready. So I'm just going to put the ironing board away. And the next stage is you need to decide how you're going to do this. A lot of people will run a gather stitch all the way along, and they will just gather it all up and put it in. Personally, I like to try and see if I can't pleat it, like I've done on this one. If you can see, which is quite hard to see on black, I've pleated it so that it looks nice and neat and straight, rather than it just being all gathered up. I think it gives a much nicer finish if you pleat it. So I'm just going to put a few pleats into it. I'm going to start by making sure that I've got it the right way round. If you see, you've got a rolled over hem there. So I'm just going to literally just the width of the edge in there. I'm just going to roll that over, and then I'm going to roll it over again, and I'm going to put a pin, if I can find my pin cushion, a couple of inches down. I want it nicely out of the way when I go to put it in. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Just roll it over once and then roll it over a second time, and that just makes the ends look nice and tidy. And then I'm just going to decide how big I want my pleats, and I'm just eyeball it. I'm just going to try and make them even both sides. So I'm just going to pleat it over, and I'm just going to put 2 pins in, one either side of the pleat, to hold it in place. And then I'm going to do one roughly the same size on the other side. I'm going to try and make sure I match them up each time. So that again is about the same size. And then I'm just going to do pin. No, done that one too big. just going to try and measure it on there to see if it will fit in, which it will. And I'm just going to put a couple more pins in these just to keep them in place. As you can see, I've just pleated it up, and I haven't measured it or done it perfectly. Just tried to get it as even as I can on both sides. And if you can see, it's just the right width to fit in to my little thing. So I'm going to do the second one, because I always find the second one's easier if you measure it against the first one before you put it in, and then I'll come back and show you. Right, so as you can see, I've gathered them all up, and what you need to do now is to just pop this inside there, like that. Now you want to be careful you don't go too far up, but you want to go in far enough that it's just going to catch it when you do your stitches. And the other thing you want to make sure that you do is that you've got the front and the back level. So what I usually do is stick a few pins in right at the bottom there, just to make sure it's going through the same level at the back, and then check on the other side. And as you can see, I've just gone through and I'm just catching the bottom with that pin. Just means that when I go along it and sew it, it's at the right level. I'm just going to put one in the middle as well. Just making sure that I'm catching the back as well. So I've just caught the back, and I know they're a little bit ruffled, but I'm going to take the pins out before I get to them so it'll smooth out a little bit. Now you've put these pins in here in the ruffles, and if you noticed, I put mine quite a way down so they're not going to get in the way when I sew, so I can leave these in. If you've put them right at the top, you're going to have to take them out as you sew. But as you can see, I've put mine a couple of inches down to hold it. So I can leave these in while I sew, because I'm not going to catch the ends of them. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I've already put the other one in and pinned it in. So I'm going to take these to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew along there just to secure them. So I'll reposition the camera and show you what I'm doing. Right, so as you can see, I'm at the sewing machine. I've just popped my work underneath the presser foot, and I've lined it up quite close to the edge, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a back stitch at the beginning. Now this is quite thick, so you want to go nice and slow, take your time. You might just need to help feed it under. Also just make sure that your needles are out of the way and that you're taking your needles out as you go. There. I'm just going to take the last pin out at the end. And I'm just going to back stitch at the end again. Alright, just going to cut off those threads there where it snapped. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a buttonhole on this and put a button on it. This one's going in my kitchen. So Tamsin's already picked her buttons, because I'm going to be doing some nice tea towels to go with this as well. So she's already picked the buttons that she wants to go on them. So I'm just going to go straight into changing my foot. I've got one of these special feed here, and if I can just find my buttons out of my button box, I'm going to be putting these little flowery buttons on because that's what Tamsin's chosen. So as you can see, you've got this little bit on here that goes up and down, and this is where you put your button. This is an automatic button. Oh, and you just pop your button in there, pop your foot on, and then there's a little lever at the side here. I don't know if you can see it. It's like a little grey lever, and you need to pull that down behind your button, and that goes down behind there. I don't know if I can zoom in so you can see that any better. Just like a little lever that sticks up, and that's what's going to make my button. Now on my machine I've got quite a lot of buttonholes, so you choose which buttonhole you want. I like that one, and then you just put your work. I love this one because it's automatic. You just line it up where you want the buttonhole. Now on this machine, I don't know about every machine, but on my machine it starts at the front of the buttonhole and works back and then comes back. So you want to put your work in at the furthest point where you want the button to start. So as you can see, I'm putting mine in quite close. So, and that's it basically. You line that all up, and all you've got to do now, I usually unplug my foot pedal for this because I don't need it, because it literally is automatic, and I just press the start button. And I don't know if I can zoom in so you can see this. Let's just move the camera over a little bit. If I just push the button, it will just do it all by itself. Just going to speed it up a little bit. I'm just going to try and pull that end out, and then suck in there. And that's it, that's the buttonhole done. Just snip off your ends. Now if your machine doesn't have an automatic buttonhole, follow your instructions for your machine. A lot have like a 4-step buttonhole, so I don't know if you can see that. I don't know if it's focusing very well. My camera's not very good at focusing. That's my buttonhole. If you're not very good at doing buttonholes, or you don't feel that you want to do a buttonhole, you could always put a popper on or a press stud on and do it that way. And then what I do is I take a pin, because the last thing I want to do now is to cut through. And I just take a pin and I just put it through right at the end of where the buttonhole is stitched. I don't know if you can see that. I literally just pop a pin in there right at the end, and then I take a seam ripper and I just pop it in the hole at the beginning, and I just very carefully, not going sideways, just tear up to that pin, and it will stop me tearing over the edge. And then as you can see, take that pin out now, my button fits nicely through my buttonhole. So I'm just going to do the other buttonhole, and then I'll show you how you can sew a button on using your machine. Right, now if you're not confident with this, you can always just sew a button on by hand, but I've got like a little button foot that you use for sewing your buttons on. So I just pop this on my machine, and I've dropped my feed dogs. You've got like your little feed dogs that pull your fabric under. I've got a little lever there so I can drop them so they're out of use, which means that my fabric isn't moving, it's staying perfectly still. And then I put my sewing machine on a zigzag stitch, and I put it usually for a buttonhole for the buttons. It's usually around a 3 or a 3.5 wide, but you'd need to test that out on your button. Mine is a 3.5. So what you need to do then is decide where you want your buttons. So I want my buttons sort of about there. So I'm going to put my fabric under first because it's quite bulky. I'm going to get my fabric into position. And then I'm just going to get my button, put it in the way I want it. And you want to put it in so that the buttons are side to side on it, because you're going to be doing a zigzag from side to side. So I've got mine in there, and I think it's positioned roughly in the right place. I'm just going to turn the wheel down just to make sure it is, and it's slightly off. I'm just going to reposition it, and yeah, that's gone right the way through that hole. So I'm just going to lift it up and see if it'll go through the next one. No, so I need to push it back slightly so that the needle will go through the next hole. So now they're feeding through. Yeah, so just done a few turns of the wheel to make sure that it's going through, and then I'm just going to put my presser foot down and then just set it to stitch, and it just needs to do half a dozen stitches, and that's it, and that's your button sewn on. So I'm just going to do button up, and that's the finished product. I don't know if you can see that. It's all nice with its pleats. And then this goes over the handle of your oven door, or if you've got handles on your kitchen cupboards that go sideways, that can go over those as well. So I hope you like this project. If you did, please subscribe, press the subscribe button, and press the like button. And I'd also like it if you could leave me a comment on what you thought of this. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.